There's a saying thrown around quite a bit that a story is only as good as its villain, and I largely believe that to be true. For any story revolving around conflict, there has to be some kind of evil entity enforcing that conflict. Through their ideological differences from the hero of the story, they often bring out the best in those they challenge, resulting in their own loss and their ideology being proven false. Ace Attorney isn't quite like that. The Ace Attorney series has a well-known cast of villains, but a good chunk of them don't actually challenge the protagonist directly and oppose their views. A lot of the time, they just commit a crime and then are an obstacle in court for you to climb over. That's not to say all of them need to directly oppose the protagonist, though. There are quite a number of villains who show up in a random side case, do their thing, and then leave. They don't require any deep thinking to understand, but they're still memorable and play their role in the story sufficiently. Not every case in the series has to be some spectacle that changes the lives of the protagonist forever, but that is what makes most of the main culprits of each game stand out above the rest. Take Christoph Gavin, for example. He has a very refined personality and is one of the most methodical killers in the series. His unmoving view on both Phoenix Wright and the law is what makes his opposition incredibly engaging. While there are mentions of this corrupt, dark age of the law where many trials are decided by basic evidence, Christoph is a firm advocate for it. He thrives in a world where evidence is the only thing that matters. However, his inflated ego and trust in the raw facts at face value are what cause him to loathe Phoenix Wright, claiming he's someone who only wins using luck. He even goes as far to get Phoenix Wright disbarred with a fake piece of forged evidence. Despite that, Phoenix goes on to investigate the case for the next 7 years, but doesn't find anything definitive. This is the same case for the trial of Vera Misham, where Christoph is pushed so far into the corner that there's no way he isn't the guilty party. But without any decisive evidence to convict him, he would get away scot-free. This is why Phoenix Wright was allowed to introduce the Mason system, where a trial would be decided not by evidence or testimony presented, but by a group of jurors onlooking the trial. And through this new way of resolving a legal matter, you prove that both Christoph and the law itself are wrong. Evidence alone may not get you as far as you need to go to get the just verdict. So while his initial takedown may not be as satisfying because you don't have that final piece of evidence to prove he's guilty without question, I would say that the drastic and needed change in the law makes it a much more fulfilling ending than most. Following the games after this one actually continued this plotline faithfully, but that's neither here nor there. So while not every villain has to be some terrible big bad that challenges the protagonist's perspective, most of the important ones do during the finale case of each game. But I will say that there's a very notable outlier here residing in perhaps the most controversial game in the series, Dual Destinies. Now, Dual Destinies isn't a bad game, it's just kind of weird. I wouldn't really go as far as saying there's a single bad Ace Attorney game in general, but some are obviously worse than others for different reasons. I think Apollo Justice is frustratingly mediocre, but only because it has two of the absolute best cases in the series, while also having two of the worst. Meanwhile, Ace Attorney Investigations is just okay. Its better cases are far from the best in the series, but its worst cases are far from the absolute worst. And then there's Dual Destinies, which I said is just weird. The quality control throughout each case is all over the place. I'll randomly enjoy parts of a case while absolutely hating others, or maybe my opinion on a certain case just flips from one day to the next. The game certainly has its fans, but it seems to have an equal amount of haters. I mean, these games never seem to get bad reviews, especially the bundles and re-releases, and I have no idea how because contrary to popular belief, these games are not all that. However, among these mixed and ever-changing opinions on Dual Destinies as a game, there is one opinion of mine that I will stand on until the day that I die, and that is, the Phantom is the worst villain in the series by far. This may not come as a surprise to some, but I have seen a shocking amount of love for this dude in recent years. Like, really? This is your GOAT? As opposed to any of the top tier villains from literally every other game in the series? The Phantom doesn't even hold a candle to the other villains in Dual Destinies, let alone the rest of the series. I mean, Ted Tonade is pretty generic and forgetful, but at least he isn't terrible. LaBelle can be pretty obnoxious, but I found him fun at points. Professor Means isn't great, but he is at least hilarious. And hey, he kind of even continues that theme of the Dark Age of the Law from the previous game. It's not super pronounced because he's only in one side case, but he honestly would have been great as a final villain. Well, maybe not him as a whole. If you take his ideology, his beliefs, and a good chunk of his personality, and just put it on someone who doesn't look like this, then it could work. And then Marlon Rhymes he's pretty good. Genuinely a great villain who's not only fun, but also has a pretty sad story regarding the accident. This case as a whole is just really damn good. But this case does not have that same luxury, and that's mainly due to the Phantom. Starting off, one of the biggest problems with the Phantom is that he isn't really a character. His whole existence is that of a super spy, contracted to kill people by a top-secret organization. But in order to be this super spy, he had to throw away his entire identity. He has no recollection of his name, his past, nothing. He even underwent special training to not feel emotions, so he wouldn't be restricted by things like fear and guilt when completing a job. So to recap, the Phantom has no identifiable likes, dislikes, backstory, or beliefs of his own, which are all things essential to making an engaging character. Off to a great start. If we keep looking into this void of enticing character traits, we also find he has no motive. You know that little thing brought up in almost every case in the series that serves as the villain's main reason for being a villain in the first place? Yeah, he doesn't really have that. As a super epic spy who follows orders without question, he was told by his employers to sabotage the Hat 1 rocket launch. There's no deeper reason for it. He was just told to do it, and so he did it. He then killed Metis Sykes to cover his tracks, which I guess can count as his own motive, but I would still group that under his initial orders to sabotage the launch and not have his cover blown. His motive for sticking around for so long years later was to destroy evidence that he accidentally left behind from the sabotage, which gives him motive for what he does now, but it doesn't make up for the fact that he didn't have any motive initially. I guess I could see an argument for him having an interesting and compelling motive by killing Metis and Clay, but the point I'm trying to make is that these were not character-motivated actions done by someone with a compelling reason to commit these actions. He was told to sabotage the rocket, and so he did. Then he covered his tracks as a part of his job. Now, this wouldn't be all that bad if, well, actually, yeah, it would still be pretty damn bad, but it wouldn't be as bad if they didn't completely ruin an entire character for the sake of a plot twist. Every Ace Attorney game has a detective who you run into during investigations and cross-examine to get the basics of most cases. This game's detective is the ever-lovable Bobby Fulbright. When I played this game and saw this amazingly gleeful and outgoing man for the first time, he immediately became my favorite character. Just like that, he was so damn likable right off the bat. Fast forward to case 5, and he's now on the stand for being suspected for the murder of Clay Tarrant. He starts getting emotional, claiming that although he's not the Phantom, he was ordered by the Phantom himself to commit these terrible acts. His character starts becoming a whole lot more desperate and tragic, which is a very interesting direction to take a detective of the series. Then Edgeworth walks in and says Fulbright has actually been dead for a whole year while the person on the stand is an imposter. It's hard for me to put into words why exactly this is so terrible without going on a hate-filled rant, so I'll do my best to not spontaneously combust here. Introducing the idea of Fulbright being manipulated into doing terrible acts is great. It both adds depth to Fulbright while making the Phantom more of a menacing threat. To pivot from that to Fulbright actually being dead and the Phantom just impersonating him the entire time removes both of those possibilities. On top of that, Fulbright has apparently been dead for a whole year, and Edgeworth just now decided to look into his corpse for identification when they previously couldn't identify it? Alright, well, now I guess we don't have to worry about Fulbright having depth because we never even met the guy. He was never in the game to begin with. Would it really have been that hard to just kill him off during the events of the game? That way, we can actually meet and connect with the real Fulbright while the writers can still have their terrible plot twist of the Phantom stealing his identity. How cool would it have been if Fulbright was present at the Hat 2 rocket launch, and then was killed right then and there by the Phantom who took over going forward? Have him burn the body beyond recognition so it takes forensics a few days to identify it. That way we can still insert the Phantom into the story with the identity theft twist, and Edgeworth presenting the corpse's identity isn't completely out of left field. But no. Instead, the supposedly awesome character that we've been with the whole game was killed off-screen long before the events of the actual game, and they conveniently didn't identify his corpse until just now. The worst part about this twist is that I don't really even care that Fulbright is dead. Well, I do care, but it's more about the fact that they baited us with a great character for the sake of a plot twist rather than actually mourning his loss, as if I knew him to begin with. None of the characters really care that Fulbright is dead either. And I don't really blame them, because they never knew him. But I at least expected some kind of sentimental reaction out of Blackwell. Maybe he would be sad that this person who he worked so closely with for the past year was dead? No, not really. Actually, from the very moment that Fulbright is first accused of being the Phantom, Black Quill immediately believes it and helps the defense push him into a corner. Which infuriates me, because before we knew about this twist, there was a conversation with Fulbright where he says he's working on rehabilitating Black Quill. He genuinely wants to help him, and based on Black Quill telling Fulbright about his relentless chase after the Phantom, we can see that there's a notable bond between these two. Somehow, Black Quill trusted this goofy dork enough to tell him about his literal life's purpose. So when Fulbright is accused of being the Phantom, why does Black Quill immediately throw him under the bus? Even when it looks like he's trusting Fulbright, it only ends up being an epic prank done so Athena can monitor his emotions with the Moon Matrix, proving he's the Phantom. That's just great. That's awesome. Very cool game. So I have no reason to care that Fulbright is dead when not a single other person in the story cares that he's dead either. Maybe the Phantom could have worked if they just didn't try so hard to make him a super secret, emotionless spy with a huge twist. This isn't entirely the Phantom's fault, but his very existence raised questions that never got any sort of resolution. The fifth case ends with a random assassin shooting the Phantom down, not lethally, and then everyone is happy. But I'm not happy because this ending just feels like a halfway point. You mean we're not going to wait for the Phantom to wake up and question him? We're not going to ask who he works for? We're not going to pursue this criminal organization responsible for this monster's existence? We're not going to go back and acknowledge the assassin shooting the Phantom from off-screen, likely to prevent him from speaking?
That is not going to happen.
We get to the point where the Phantom is broken emotionally, when he previously couldn't feel emotion, and is scared for his life as he desperately tries to find his true face. After something like that, he could become an interesting character if they just kept going. But I guess Athena and Black Quill are happy now, so the case has to end. I'm gonna stop right there before this turns into a full-on dual Destinies hate video. The Phantom is the worst Ace Attorney villain, and perhaps the worst character in general. Everything that a character needs to be a character is not found in the Phantom. He is an empty void used by the writers to try and fit whatever needs they have for the plot. His very existence not only ruins that of another character, but the game as a whole. We've had our fair share of villains who are less than stellar in the past, but at least there's something to them, something tangible to grab on and connect to, even if it's bad. The Phantom isn't just some side villain, he's the final boss that the entire game has been building towards, and as such, I believe that makes his failure to be even the least bit engaging all the worse. He had a higher responsibility than the game's other villains to be engaging, and he fell completely flat. With nothing to challenge the protagonist with other than his wit, he fails to leave the slightest impact on any of these characters. This abomination soured the entire Dual Destinies experience for me, and is the sole reason why I can't stand this game. At least the writers got it all out of their system, so we never have to deal with a villain like this again. Although, the fact that he's a detective of the game means he still appears in all the promotional material, and it just makes me want to commit unspeakable acts beyond the boundaries of human morality.
No!